In this fourth part of the .NET 5 REST API tutorial, we introduce additional controller actions for creating, updating, and deleting items. We will also learn how to validate the incoming DTOs to prevent invalid data from landing in the service. Today you will learn how to create resources with post, how to validate the values of DTO properties, how to update resources with put, and how to delete resources with delete. It is time now to introduce the rest of our routes, right? So a route for post to create an item, a route for update to update the item, and the route for delete to be able to delete the item. So let's start with post, right? And before doing anything else, what we're going to have to do is to update a repository to be able to have that that route for creating an item, right? So let's do that, and I'm going to start again by going to the interface. That's the first thing to do. And so let's declare void create item. Okay, so this new method just returns nothing, and it just receives the item that needs to be created into the repository. Now let's switch back to our concrete in-mem items repository, and I'm going to say implement interface. So that brings in the new method right there. And since it's an in-memory repository, this is as straightforward as just saying items.add item. That's all it is. And then now we need to expose this into the controller, right? So it's time to add a route in the controller. But before doing that, we got to realize that so the client is going to be sending this item, and we will have to establish another contract for receiving that item. It cannot be item DTO because we don't need as many properties as in item DTO for the creation of an item. So let's see what I mean by that. So I'm going to go to our DTOs folder. I'm going to create a new file, and let's call it create item DTO, and add namespace catalog.dtos, and then okay, just like before, we're going to be using a record for this. Pretty convenient for DTOs. And so now if you look back at item DTO, let's see. So what would make sense to be sent by the client as we create an item? So normally the ID is auto-generated on the server side, right? So we don't need to be passing in that ID. We do need a name and a price, and likely the created date is going to also be generated on the service. So we're only going to be including these two. There it is. So we have name and price, and that will be it for our create item DTO. And now let's see how we can use it in the controller. So back to the controller. Let's see. How do we declare this post route? So it's going to be public an action result, because again we could return more than one thing in this method. Things could happen, and the convention for a post or a create method is to create the item and return the item that got created. So if you're going to do that, we should be fine to return the item DTO. Now the conventions here are going to vary. So some people will create their own response object here. It doesn't have to be item DTO. It happens to be that it works fine for us in this case, so that's okay. So it's going to be called create item DTO. That's going to be our input contract, item DTO. Okay, and then let's qualify this with the right verb. So HTTP post, and then just for documentation, we'll say so this is going to be invoked when somebody does a post into the items route with the correct body, of course. So how do we create an item? So very straightforward. We're going to say, well, item equals new. We don't have to specify the type. So thanks C#9. And then, yeah, so let's just say ID equals, here's where we actually generate the ID for the item. So it's going to be GUID.newGUID. So the name is item DTO.name. Same for the price. .price. And then the created date is, as you would expect, the time offset.utc now. So that's the item. And now we have to, well, we'll take advantage of the repository method we just created. Create item, and then item goes there. And then once the item has been created, the convention here is to, to return the item that got created, and also to return a header that specifies where you can go ahead and get information about that created item. So to do that, what we can do is use created at action. You could also use created at route. That's another way to do it. Created action will work fine for us because what we can do here is say, okay, so what's the action that we want? What's the action that reflects the route to get information about the item? That's going to be our get item action right here. So what we can do here is say, well, that's going to be the name of get item. And then we need to specify the ID that's going to be passed to that other route. So for that, let's create just a simple anonymous type here with ID equals item ID. So that's a generated ID. And then finally, the actual object that's going to be returned, which is item. And again, let's take advantage of our extension method as DTO. So we take the item that got created, and then we just convert it as a DTO. And yeah, that's it. Let's do F5, see if this works. So back to Swagger. Let's refresh this. So now we have our post route over here, as you can see. And also our create item DTO is showing up as a new contract that we are exposing to our clients. So let's go to post, try it out. And as you can see now, we only need to provide a name and a price. So let's see for the name. So let's see, let's bring in something like another type of sword, I guess. So let's see, Platinum sword. It's going to be a bit expensive, let's say 35. And yeah, so that's that. Let's execute, see what we get. So as you can see, here's the request URL, the same as the get, but in this case, it is a post. We have gotten 201, meaning created at route. So it got created, the Platinum sword. And as you can see here, we have a location header that specifies where is that we can find that item. So if we actually take this this GUID here and we go to our, let's collapse this and go to our get route, going to try it out. We're going to paste that here, execute. As you can see now, this is the route that was provided in the location header for post, and it actually is able to find the Platinum sword that we just created. And in fact, if we just get the full list of all the items, try it out, execute. So now we don't have just 3, we have 4 items, including that Platinum sword. But then let's also try one more thing. What happens if I try to create something without a name? Does that make sense? Well, let's try it out. Turns to be that was accepted. And now we have an item with a null value, which is totally unacceptable. And again, in fact, we just go to the get route and we say execute, and we can see we have an item with null, which is pretty bad. How can we protect ourselves against that situation? So there's this thing called data annotations, which is something we can add to our DTO in this case to prevent that situation. So back into create item DTO, what we can do is just request that this field is required. And I'm going to add the data annotations namespace in there. So name has to be provided and price has to be provided. And for price, not just that, let's do one more thing. Let's say there's going to be a range of possible values for price, because we should probably not accept a negative value or even a 0 here. So let's say that we're only going to accept values from, let's say, from 1 to 1000. That should be a valid range for us. So just by doing this, we are protecting the values that are going to be coming into the controller. So I'm going to do F5 again, and let's see how that goes. So back in Swagger, I'm going to be collapsing this route. So back in post, I'll just try to do the same thing again. I'll try to execute this, and this time now we have a 400, so bad request error, and clearly it says here that name field is required. So now data validations are coming into place, and so we must provide a name. Let's say actually play with the price here. Let's say I try a negative number, right? See what happens. The field price must be between 1 and 1000, right? So data annotations for validations, pretty useful for validating our DTO. Now it's time to implement our update route. So let's go back to Visual Studio Code, close terminal. And just like before, let's go back to our repository items repository interface and add the relevant method. So let's say this is going to be a void, again, update item, and this is going to receive the item to get updated. Very similar to create item. Now, back to the concrete implementation. I'm going to say again, implement interface. That brings in the method, update item. So how would we update this item? So since it is an in-memory list, really the only thing that we have to do is just find the relevant item and update it with the incoming item, right? So to do that, let's just find the index of the relevant item. So I'm going to say items, find index, and then, and so this is the existing item. So you're going to find the existing item where existing item.id matches item.id. Okay, so that's just finding the index of the item that we're looking for, and when we found it, we can do items index equals item. That's all it is. So we will update the item in the right location. So it's time to go back to the controller. Well, almost time to go back to the controller, because as you may realize at this point, we do need some DTO to receive the input for the update route. And even when this input is going to be pretty much the same as with create item DTO, it is a good practice to actually have another DTO for this case, because you don't know, like right now it's the same thing, but eventually it could be that an update means something different than a create. So let's just do update item DTO. Yeah, it's a copy of create item DTO, pretty much has the same properties. It's the only thing that you can modify, the name and the price, and required and the range, right? So now let's go back to the controller, items controller, and let's create our update route. So this is going to be, again, public action result. In this case, the convention for a put is to actually not return anything. So just what we call no content. So it's going to be no type here other than action result. It's going to be called update item. We need to receive two things. The first thing is the GUID of the ID of the item, and then our new update item DTO. Let's call it item DTO. And then let's not forget to add the correct verb here, an HTTP put. And just like we did before, the route is going to be, just for documentation, when you do a put into /items, and then slash, that's the piece that we're missing actually here. We need to also specify here the template, which is in this case is the ID. So that means that when we do a put, we have to specify the ID in such a way like this, right? So put items / the ID, and then we'll hit this method here. So let's see. So first thing, so how we would do an update. First thing to do, is find the item. So existing item, and we'll use our repository for that. We already have a method for this, which is get item, passing the ID. And then it will be great to verify if this item actually exists. So if existing item is null, then well, we couldn't find it, so we will just return not found. And that's the end of the story for that branch. And then if we found it, what we're going to do is just well, proceed to do the we're going to create a new item, which is the updated item in our system. So in this case, what we're going to say is item updated item equals, it is actually our existing item, but with a couple of differences. Like we need to use the name of the provided item DTO and the price of that also provided item DTO. So now here I just use one nicety of record types that I mentioned when I was talking about record types, which is the with expression here. So what's happening here is that we're saying, okay, so we're taking this existing item here and we're creating a copy of it with the following two properties modified for new values. So that's a very nice addition into records, and allows me to use what is really an immutable type, but still I can go ahead and modify some properties on initialization. So updated item is just a copy of existing item with a bunch of updated properties. Very nice addition in record types. When we have this updated item, we can go ahead and say, okay, so repository dot update item, the method that we just created, and send the updated item. And like I said, the convention is to return no content, so nothing to report, so just return that. Let's try this out. F5 and back to Swagger, refresh. So here it is, our put route. And before doing a put, let's actually get one of our items. So try it out, execute. So let's say we're going to modify our potion here. Okay, so the potion, I'm going to collapse this, open put. So for put, we have to provide an ID and updated values here. So this is a potion. Let's actually rename it to, let's say, super potion. And let's bump the price to, I don't know, let's say 29. So execute, and then just as expected, we get 204, which is no content, and you can see the route that was executed here. And then if it succeeded, we should be able to get an updated potion there. So I'll just get the full list of all the items that we have now. Let's see what happens. And there it is, no longer potion, super potion with updated price. Also notice down here that we do have this update item DTO available now here, the new contract. So with update ready, the last thing to add is our delete route. So let's go back to controller, back to the project, and just as before, back to the repository interface, and let's do void delete item with ID. Only thing that we need for deleting an item is just to know the ID of it. So back to the repository, let's implement the interface for delete item. And actually delete item is going to be very similar to update item. First thing that we have to do is find the item, the index of the item. And now we can just say items.remove at that index. That's all it is. We have to say ID here. So we have the repository ready, and now we can move forward to the controller. In this case, we're not going to need another DTO because the only thing that's needed here is just a simple ID. So let's just implement the controller action. So public action result delete item. Just like with update, we're going to return no content. So action result, delete item, GUID ID, and let's add the verb. So this is going to be an HTTP delete. And again, documentation. So this is going to honor delete / items, and then / let's not forget our template, which is the ID. So / items ID. And to perform the deletion, it's actually a bit similar to update. So let's try to find the item first. I'm going to just copy that piece there. So not found if we can't find it. And then we go ahead and do repository dot delete item and the ID. And just like we did before, return no content. And that's all it is. So F5. And back to Swagger, refresh again. And now you can see we have our delete action available. So let's capture the name of one of our items and see if we can delete it. We'll execute this. So let's try to delete that potion. Copy, collapse, expand, try out, put the ID, and execute. So here's the route. When we go 204, it's expected, no content. So if I try to get the items again, let's see what happens. Only have 2. So no more potion available here. And yeah, so that will be the end of our routes. And so at this point, we have an API fully implemented with a get, post, put, and delete methods. And yeah, so I hope this was useful. And yeah, let me know if you have any questions in the comments below. And if you like this, and if you find use of this, please consider hitting the like button. Don't forget to subscribe if you want to know of any new videos that I produce in the future. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.